Hi, I'm Katie Sullivan, and just a normal American woman. But to the left, that makes me a cisgendered ethno-imperialist birthing person with pronouns she, her. Words like that are quite a mouthful, and it's one America needs to spit out before we choke on it.
Hello everybody and welcome back for another politastic episode of Fundie Fridays. If you're new around these parts, my wife, the Reverend Jen, and I, well, on this channel we like to talk about things like American conservative politics, evangelical Christianity, pop culture, gay stuff, and the way all of those things just seem to bump into each other like 920 some odd pages of a document that never should have been written in the first place. And today I humbly bring all of you what I really and truly believe is my most requested episode to date. And it's really not even close. If you're curious, my second most requested episode to date was actually the Ron DeSantis one, but this far and away has taken the cake. By now, especially if you've clicked this video, I imagine that you have heard of Project 2025, the Republican conservative plan/coup to take over the White House in November before installing their own Trump-based dictatorship come 2025. It is the biggest topic going around right now, and everybody seems to be talking about it, and everybody wants to hear about it too. And I'll be honest, I was a little intimidated because I didn't know if I'd have anything much to contribute to this conversation. Truly, this thing has been, in at least some regards, like a big old collective writing prompt distributed to every single one of your favorite left-leaning content creators, let me tell you. And truth be told, it's not a very friendly topic for the content creator either. See, because for all of the media coverage and all of the bluster, the actual Project 2025 book is unrelentingly dry. And that's the thing. People are fun, they're moody, they're dynamic, they're messy, they're unpredictable. And that's why I love to cover them. I love to cover people. And the thing is, this isn't people. This is a book. Well, not even really. It's not even a book. It's an exhaustive, excessively detailed, long-form policy proposal. It's dry and boring and terrible to read by design. And as such, it also tends to have none of the things that constitute a good story. And before we even jump into my video on the topic, I am going to say up front that I did not do an exhaustive cover-to-cover read of this thing. Personally, I think they want you to waste your time by digging into it, and I'm not going to participate in that. I did the smart thing, at least in my opinion. I downloaded the PDF and then I Control-F'd my way through the document looking for the terms and ideas I thought I would need to know about in particular, and got the gist from there. And beyond that, I'm tapping into this great, incredible, and ever-developing collective narrative coming from all of the journalists and content creators of the world who are covering Project 2025 right now. I feel like all of us are kind of working together to read this thing, parse it apart, pick out the most significant info, and then report that back to the rest of the world. And I think it's pretty cool, and I'm kind of honored to take part in the process. I'm also going to admit up front to you all, I didn't have a great deal of prep time for this episode. See, here's the thing. This particular episode of Fundie Fridays is a difficult fan request episode sandwiched between two of my personal biggest passion projects on the channel to date, namely the Kanakuk Camps episode I helped Jen with recently, and next month's episode I'm super excited about, covering Hulk Hogan. Oh, likewise, I'm also going to a Charlie XCX concert at the end of the month, which has even further complicated all of this, but what can I say? Brat Autumn waits for no one.
I thought this fucking song was big in Germany!
But as Steven Spielberg said, it's one for you, one for them. And today, I'm doing what the people have asked me for. No matter what, people are asking for this, and I am determined to try and bring you all a good, interesting episode about this otherwise really difficult topic. So after deciding that, with some renewed gumption, I went ahead and locked in, read a bunch of articles, and then very particularly, I listened to the work of two phenomenal journalists, Noel King at Vox and Shelby Talcott at Semaphore, who collaborated on King's Today Explained podcast for a wonderful 3-part series covering the rise, fall, and broader impact of Project 2025. And I want to highlight I highly recommend listening to all 3 of those original Vox episodes, and what you're seeing today, it has a lot of influences and resources. You can check my info box out in the description, but the work of these 2 journalists and these podcasts in particular, a lot of what I'm doing today is just signal boosting their work. And after riding high on how great their work was, I was able then to plot out a bit of a roadmap for how I wanted to tell the Project 2025 story in my own way. One that is a video I would like, but also one that acknowledges all the unique challenges that go into this episode. And I will say, pro tip, if you need to get excited for a long night writing about left-leaning populism and the perils of government-sponsored dehumanization, I have found that a Spotify playlist composed of equal parts Glorilla and Creedence Clearwater Revival really gets the job done. So with that in mind, here are my 2 goals for today's episode. Number 1, I want anybody who is watching this episode who is currently confused about Project 2025 to no longer be confused about it by the end of the episode. That's the first thing. And the second thing I want to do is try and say at least 1 or 2 things throughout the episode about Project 2025 that most of you haven't heard before. I feel like that's a pretty nice little rubric. I'm trying to be gentle on myself, can you tell? And honestly, I think I can see why Project 2025 has been such a highly requested, even though it's eternally covered topic. Because the thing is, Project 2025, unlike any other political topic I've seen before, is unique in that it really does go after the health and well-being of everyone. Truly, nothing is spared from this 900-page brick of white Christian male social dysfunction made manifest.
This is Project 2025.
If you know an American, or honestly any living earthling at this point, then you are 1 degree of separation away from someone whose life will be made worse if Project 2025 is implemented. But because this thing fucks over basically every type of person, it also seems that every person who talks about it has unique and interesting complaints. And I will say that even with all of the coverage I've read, which isn't the most in the world, but enough to feel confident in what I'm talking about, I will say that there still are a couple of things that haven't been talked about Project 2025 that I feel like might ought to be. So hopefully I get a chance to talk about those things today too. And in the end, I am at least confident that you will walk away from this video no longer confused about Project 2025. You probably will still be scared of it, maybe more so, but you won't be confused anymore. And that's nice. And hey, to all of you know-it-alls out there sitting here saying, well, James, if you didn't have enough time, why didn't you make the video later? Why don't you just delay the video? You don't have to make... For which I say, mind your beeswax, first of all. And second of all, as an adult and a small business owner, sometimes outside deadlines are just a reality of the job, okay? Oh, and completely unrelated to the thing I just said, Fundie Fridays would like to take a moment and thank the sponsor for today's video, Helix Sleep.
Well, if this doesn't scream childless cat lady, I don't know what will. This video is sponsored by Helix Sleep. Their Labor Day sale is running now, and it's a great time to upgrade your mattress. You can get 25% off your purchase for a limited time. Check out the Helix site for more details. Hello. My name is Jen. I'm the creator of Fundie Fridays and the co-host of this channel. And I'm also a fake reverend on the internet, so I know a thing or two about losing sleep at night. And I'm here to tell you that ever since I switched to a premium Helix mattress, I've had the best sleep of my life. Everyone has unique sleep preferences, and so Helix has made it super easy to customize what kind of mattress is perfect for your needs thanks to their easy sleep quiz. Just answer a few simple questions every second. The Twilight Luxe Queen Mattress. Isn't it fun how that worked? The shipping was out and payment plans. But I've had my Helix mattress for several months now, and it's holding up great. And it's so thick and luxurious that sometimes I like to close my eyes and pretend that I'm actually sleeping on a hotel mattress. But maybe not with all the snakes. I love my Helix mattress, and I think you would too. Perfect time to up helixsleep.com.
With old Linda Ellerby treatment, you know, she taught me the 5 W's, the who, what, when, where, and why, and sometimes how. I don't know if that's what it is. I remember hearing that one, but tell me in the comments if you only heard the 5 W's, like, purely. And I tried to take that approach to figuring out Project 2025. This thing is so big and complicated, I figured I'd simplify it as much as I possibly could. That being said, my notes are all kind of out of order here, and I slapdashed some of this, so the thoughts are there, but the writing's a little woohoo. So I'm gonna jump around a little bit. I'm gonna change the order around kind of on the fly, and I'm gonna try to make things come together in an order that makes sense, but it may be a little kookier today than it is usually. So just be aware of that. And while it's kind of tricky, I honestly don't know how I'm going to edit this or what order these are going to be in. I kind of prepared this specifically along the way I've always been taught these things, which is who, what, where, when, and why. But at the same time, that's how I recorded it. I may edit it differently later, depending on what I feel like or how it flows. I don't know if you know, Jen and I write and star in and edit these things ourselves, so I'm editing the video that you see here. So I say that because if this is a little disjointed or doesn't always flow together the best, I tried my best. I'm gonna do my best for you. So just please bear with me a little bit. But anyway, to get along with all of this, I am going to start us off with what I consider to be the who of Project 2025. And that all starts with the Heritage Foundation.
Our heritage is believing parents have a say in their kids' education. Our heritage is understanding that when we give up the right to life, we give up everything. Our heritage is protecting free and fair elections and knowing a broken southern border when we see it. Our heritage is refusing to drown our grandchildren in senseless government debt. Our heritage is telling corrupt foreign governments, woke corporations, and leftist bureaucrats that they belong in the back seat.
Oh, and just for reference in my notes, I always wrote Heritage Foundation as HF, and so I started calling them the HEF. So for the rest of the episode, I'm going to refer to them as the HEF whenever they should come up. So if you hear the HEF, that's the Heritage Foundation. Now, the HEF is a conservative, and when I say conservative, I mean deeply conservative, public policy think tank, boasting just unbelievable amounts of influence over the entire American GOP, and honestly, all of American politics at large. Oh, think tanks, by the way, if you're curious, are kind of just like the privatized, shitty version of public sector, public health, well-being research.
Maybe we could start by just having you give everyone watching and listening a good description of what a think tank is.
At its base, any think tank, whether it's on the political left or the political right or in the center, starts with research. It may focus on a certain set of public policy issues. The purpose of the research at a think tank is to affect the outcome of public policy. Some think tanks will only focus on the research. Other think tanks will use that research and then hire people to go advocate, that is to say that they're lobbyists, to directly influence the outcome of public policy, whether that's at the federal level in the United States, obviously with Congress and the executive branch, at the state level, or even at the local levels.
You're seeing a lot more conservative think tanks nowadays, particularly because a lot of them are feeling ostracized in academia because their terrible ideas and theories don't work out and no one likes them. But what can I say when real objective social science and public policy tend to not agree with you because of all that pesky evidence and whatnot? Well, it's easy to get salty.
There's been a need for conservative think tanks to emerge because, as is well known on statistical grounds, rather than merely being a consequence of a conspiracy theory, there are virtually no conservatives in universities at the faculty level, and certainly vanishingly few in the social sciences and the humanities, which is where most of the research that pertains to policy would otherwise be conducted. And so
now there were a lot, and I mean a lot, over 100 reportedly, of other organizations who helped the HEF prepare this document. Most notably, I saw references to the Federalist Society. They kind of seem to be the number 2 in this op. And there were at least 60 organizations credited as being part of the process in the actual document itself. And so now that we know what the HEF is, I can explain to you what the HEF president is. Also, I've decided I think I'm going to give up on that HEF thing. It's confusing the hell out of me. We're going to talk about Kevin Roberts. He's the Heritage Foundation president. So Kevin Roberts, widely regarded as kind of the mastermind of Project 2025. Now, from what I can tell, Kevin Roberts kind of seems to be a bit of a newcomer to the conservative lobbying space. But at the same time, also comes across as a golden boy with these grandiose schemes for a conservative American takeover.
I'm here, of course, to lead this organization, but I'm here to lead you to take back this country. There is no other institution that has the ability, uniquely, to remind the current regime to get back in their box and stay there. We have an opportunity at the Heritage Foundation, not only to help recohere the conservative movement at this really important time, but also to set a positive vision for America. We are going to save this country.
Kevin's also been one of the lead forces in the entire country when it comes to advancing Donald Trump's 2020 election fraud conspiracy, and has been quoted that he sees it as the goal of the Heritage Foundation to quote-unquote institutionalize Trumpism throughout the United States.
Alicia just asked, is your organization going to accept the results of the 2024 election, regardless of the outcome?
Yes, if there isn't massive fraud like there was in 2020.
What does that mean?
If there isn't massive fraud.
Do you believe that there was not massive fraud?
There was massive fraud. We have an election fraud database that has documented that over years. By the way, the Heritage Foundation has been concerned about election integrity for decades, not just about 2020. We've been documenting this problem for a very long time. And if one of the
I believe, according to the Heritage Foundation, sir, by your count, Heritage Foundation has done an investigation, and according to your count, there have been 1,513 proven instances of voter fraud across the United States since 1982.
Yeah, that's probably
1,513.
Because they're very hard to document. And the Democrat Party is very good at fraud.
Is it tied to Trump or not?
The work of the Heritage Foundation was to institutionalize Trumpism. Trumpism as a new version of conservatism. And by institutionalizing Trumpism, what we're saying is that even though we are known as Ronald Reagan's think tank, I'm a son of the Reagan Revolution, I'm very proud of that, that's 40 years ago. And we need to understand what time it is in America. And right now, Donald Trump, whether someone likes it or not, I happen to like it, is the standard bearer for conservatism.
Kevin also seems really obsessed with the idea that the woke left has taken over society, and more recently with taking back control of society from liberalism, or whatever he seems to think it is.
In spite of all this nonsense from the left, we are going to win. We're in the process of taking this country back. No one in the audience should be despairing. No one should be discouraged. We ought to be really encouraged by what happened yesterday. And in spite of all of the injustice, which of course friends and audience of this show, of our friend Steve know, we are going to prevail. Let me speak about the radical left. You and I have both been parts of faculties and faculty senates and understand that the left has taken over our institutions. The reason that they are apoplectic right now, the reason that so many anchors on MSNBC, for example, are losing their minds daily is because our side is winning. And so I come full circle in this response and just want to encourage you with some substance that we are in the process of the Second American Revolution, which will remain bloodless if the left allows it to be.
Now, I'll be honest, as far as I can tell, Kevin Roberts is kind of a J.D. Vance type. He really believes himself to be destined for nothing more than standing by some terrible tyrant's side and just hoping to make society better by advising said terrible tyrant to do conservative things in the hopes that they use their unlimited power to actually do some of those things. We can also hear him complaining here on Jordan Peterson's podcast about how he was ostracized by all of his liberal academic peers for being a conservative.
Roughly 20 years ago, I forget the exact year, but President Reagan had recently passed away, and my colleagues in the history department decided, now remember, as I've mentioned a few minutes ago, they're all big libs. They decided they were going to host a symposium about Reagan's legacy. I just thought, while I don't think anyone's perfect, Reagan was a great but not a perfect president, there simply was not going to be a fair, objective assessment of his legacy as president of the United States. And so I talked to my other conservative friend, the other conservative in the College of Liberal Arts, who was an economist, and I said, well, let's go join this panel of 4 historians and let's offer a balanced opinion. But because of the scheduled appearance of the 2 of us as conservatives, they canceled it. And they canceled it because, as you know well from your own experience, they can't stand the disagreement. And frankly, although they wouldn't admit it, I think they were fearful of the facts that we would bring to the table.
And hey, bud, you know, it does suck to be ostracized for your beliefs. Although I do suspect that he might have been ostracized more for bragging about beating a dog to death with a shovel than he was for his conservative beliefs, per se. But I mean, you know, what do I know? All right, so next up on the Project 2025 train of terror is a guy named Leonard Leo. Leonard Leo is a highly influential conservative legal scholar and researcher, best known as a longtime bigwig at the Conservative Federalist Society. From what I can tell, Leonard Leo is most notable today for being considered the architect of the current conservative supermajority on the Supreme Court.
You're on leave from the Federalist Society. You're advising the president on Supreme Court nominees. So what does that mean?
It means you listen a lot. Because you want to get a sense of what the president's perspectives are on what he wants in a justice. And that means knowing everything you can know about prospective nominees, and then once there's been a nomination, knowing everything you can possibly know about that record, and really knowing how to navigate the process. Because as we know, it can be a very contentious process, and not just in terms of Democrats, but there's the whole question of, how Republicans deal with the nomination and confirmation process, how vigorous they're going to be in pushing things forward. I think the president's made it pretty clearly that he has a set of standards for each of these seats, no matter who is vacating them. So I don't think you're going to see a whole lot of difference between the kind of person he nominated this time and the kind of person who's going to be nominated next time. I think it's going to be someone who's really committed to, as he puts it, interpreting the Constitution the way the framers meant it to be.
Let's take a look at a quote from this article by Andy Kroll, Andrea Bernstein, and Ilya Meritz at ProPublica to find out a little bit more about how Leonard ticks. The judges and the security detail, the law school leadership, and the legal theorists. All of this was a vivid display, not only of Leo's power, but of his vision. Decades ago, he'd realized it was not enough to have a majority of Supreme Court justices. To undo landmark rulings like Roe, his movement would need to make sure the court heard the right cases, brought by the right people, and heard by the right lower court judges. Leo began building a machine to do just that. He didn't just cultivate friendships with conservative Supreme Court justices, arranging private jet trips, joining them on vacation, brokering speaking engagements. He also drew on his network of contacts to place Federalist Society proteges in clerkships, judgeships, and jobs in the White House and across the federal government. He personally called state attorneys general to recommend hires for positions he presciently understood were key, like solicitors general, the unsung litigators who represent states before the U.S. Supreme Court. Oh, and longtime fans of Fundie Fridays may recall that Ted Cruz, the terrible Texas senator, actually got his start as a Solicitor General. So yeah, it's a position that is really unsung, but a really big deal if put in the wrong hands. In states that elect jurists, groups close to Leo spent millions of dollars to place his allies on the bench. In states that appoint top judges, he maneuvered to play a role in their selection. And Leo was capable of playing bare-knuckled politics. He once privately lobbied a Republican governor's office to reject a potential judicial pick, and if the governor defied him, threatened, quote-unquote, fury from the conservative base the likes of which you and the governor have never seen. Now, to pay for all of this, Leo became one of the most prolific fundraisers in American politics. Between 2014 and 2020, tax records show that groups in his orbit raised more than $600 million. His donors include hedge fund billionaire Paul Singer, Texas real estate magnate Harlan Crow, and the Koch family. Leo grasped the stakes of these seemingly obscure races and appointments long before liberals and Democrats did. The left, even though we are somewhat court worshippers, never understood the potency of the courts as a political machine. On the right, they did, said Carolyn Fredrickson, a visiting professor at Georgetown Law and a former president of the American Constitution Society, the left's answer to the Federalist Society. As much as I hate to say it, you've got to really admire what they achieved. Belatedly, Leo's opposition has galvanized, joining conservatives in an arms race that shows no signs of slowing down. A pioneer in modern legal macro strategy, Leo recognized the importance of filling low-level but actionable government positions with like-minded conservatives who could help him achieve big changes at the Supreme Court level. And further, by developing the modern network of big-money billionaire donors and conservative connections through which the modern GOP fills almost all of its open judicial seats. And he is also a tradcath with 7 children who looks like a Muppet. But nonetheless, probably the biggest brains of the entire Project 2025 operation. And so now let's go to the smallest brains in the Project 2025 operation and talk about Paul Dans. And right away, I cannot stress it enough. It seems to me, at least, like Paul Dans is far and away the least important person in this gaggle of co-conspirators.
This project's about restoring self-governance. It's about putting Americans back in the room of their own government. What it isn't about is drag queens running around on the south lawn of the White House and being saluted as the bravest people. No, the bravest people were the ones who fought and died and sacrificed for this country over 200 years.
He's in his house with nail polish on, plucking a guitar. Great, your brother's jumping out of planes in Iraq.
And I swear to God, the more I read about him, the more the guy felt like a patsy. Just there to fall on the sword in case anything went wrong, which we'll see how that played out for him a little later on. But regardless, let's find out how this dimwit even got into this position and what position he actually held. So, per my research, up until 2019, Paul Dans was basically a nobody with a middling professional background across a strange combination of law and architecture for some reason, and with generally nothing special to his name as far as I could tell. But in 2019, Dans would use his wife's connection as a personal trainer for supermodel Carly Kloss to connect with Kloss's brother-in-law, Jared Kushner. And from there, he was able to finagle his way into some jobs with the Trump administration, at both Housing and Urban Development and the Office of Personnel specifically. Now, all of this middling his way through the Trump administration would culminate in Dans being placed as the head of the Project 2025 project. He was basically the head of Project 2025 itself. Now, Kevin Roberts was the head of the Heritage Foundation and seems to have had all the real power here, but Dans was supposed to be in charge of Project 2025. That's probably all I need to tell you about for Dans right now. He'll come back up later on, but suffice it to say, he's just kind of the dimwit figurehead at the top of this thing. He's very much in a Michael Scott type role for all of my Office fans out there. And honestly, those are the three guys I hear most often associated with Project 2025. Although there are two more that I want to add on the pile. Namely, J.D. Vance and Curtis Yarvin. Now, long time, or at least last couple months, fans of Fundie Fridays will know that I recently did a big video essay covering J.D. Vance, kind of going through his life and time and how he got to being the VP nom and how it's all gone wrong for him. And a big part of that was his influence from a very controversial and extremely weirdly conservative online political blogger named Curtis Yarvin, who goes by the moniker Mencius Moldbug. I still to this day don't know why he calls himself that. Now, both of these guys, and kind of like I mentioned with Kevin Roberts before, are those kind of conservative, pseudo-modern monarchists I talked about. They so desperately are looking for some kind of change that they want to just strip away the government's protections and checks and balances entirely and just let one person have total control so they can make change as quickly as possible. Yarvin being kind of a theorist who advances this idea online, and J.D. Vance obviously being a legitimate politician who is advancing it out in the real world.
And finally, you need a CEO, and a national CEO is what's called a dictator. It's the same thing. There's no difference between a CEO and a dictator. If Americans want to change their government, they're going to have to get over their dictator phobia.
You know, there's this guy Curtis Yarvin who's written about some of these things, and so one is to basically accept that this entire thing is going to fall in on itself, right? And so the task of conservatives right now is to preserve as much as can be preserved. And then when the inevitable collapse of the country comes, ensure that conservatives are able to sort of help build back the country in a way that's actually better, not Joe Biden's build back better, but actually some sort of reconstruction of the country. I think that's too pessimistic and too defeatist. I tend to think that we should seize the institutions of the left and turn them against the left, right? We need like a de-Bathification program, but like a de-wokification program in the United States, right? So one of the things I've always been very sympathetic to is this idea that we don't have a real constitutional republic anymore. What we have is an administrative state, right? The administrative state controls everything, right? So to the point that, like, when Donald Trump wins, he can't even sometimes get his people in core positions of authority in the administrative estate. It's like, well, do we have a constitutional republic? The founding fathers actually created a very powerful chief executive, a very powerful president. But if he can't even fire the people in his own administration, like, is this really a successful republic? I think Trump is going to run again in 2024. I think he'll probably win again in 2024. I think that what Trump should do, like if I was giving him one piece of advice, fire every single mid-level bureaucrat, every civil servant in the administrative state, replace them with our people. And when the courts, because you will get taken to court, and then when the courts stop you, stand before the country like Andrew Jackson did and say the Chief Justice has made his ruling, now let him enforce it.
And overall, it just feels to me like all of these guys have, again, in their heads, this destiny for themselves that they're going to be the shadowy figure behind an evil tyrant. Like, why would you want that for yourself? But like, that seems to be like what these guys think success is. Because, and we talked a little bit about this before, but a lot of American conservatives nowadays are just monarchists. They want a god, emperor, king man to come in and wave his big phallic magic scepter over the problem and fix whatever thing they can come up with, and they just hope to God that he won't ever figure out that he could destroy all life as we know it from there. And now that J.D. Vance is on the Trump ticket, I personally, at least, and this is just my opinion, but I kind of see him as the Heritage Foundation and Project 2025's representative on that ticket. We'll talk about how J.D. Vance and all them are responding to Project 2025 in a moment, but suffice it to say that J.D. believes all of the stuff in Project 2025. He seems to be the true believer representative for this stuff on the ticket. And he seems to, at least again, in my opinion, be most directly influenced in those beliefs by this online right-wing blogosphere, and specifically for him, by the work of Curtis Yarvin. So, as far as I could tell in my research, those were the big who's who of Project 2025. Those are the names you need to remember. And now that I've told you all the people who are involved with Project 2025, perhaps it's a good time to move on to the what of this story, namely, what in the hell is Project 2025 at all? Okay. So in the simplest terms, Project 2025 is a presidential transition plan and policy roadmap very specifically for Donald Trump should he win the 2024 US presidential election. More broadly, though, Project 2025 is a far-reaching, comprehensive process through which the US far right could potentially systematically reshape the government in its own image. I found that the easiest way to understand the project, even more than actually reading any of the real provisions of the big document itself, is to check into its 4 pillars. The 4 pillars are essentially the widest angle you can take of the project. The 4 pillars are basically the overarching ideas of Project 2025 and, broadly speaking, how they intend to advance them. And I found going through them made things come into clearest focus for me, so let's do that together now. So, Pillar 1. This is what I call the Big Book of Bad Ideas. And specifically, this is the 900-page volume of text that most people I've talked to and seen in the media seem to first reference or recognize as quote-unquote Project 2025. Like, a lot of people think that Project 2025 is this document. It's not. That is just Pillar 1 of the project.
This is Project 2025.
Now, the official title for this big-ass book is Mandate for Leadership, The Conservative Promise, but we'll dig into that title very specifically a little bit later on. For right now, what you need to know is that Pillar 1 is an exhaustive, comprehensive, disgustingly detailed outline of the specific policies, procedures, and positions that the Heritage Foundation and its allies want the new president to enact. And notably, this document is public-facing and freely available on the Project 2025 website right now, to this day, at least time of recording. You can go download it, and highly encourage you to do that, because one day they may not let you. But the important thing is, this is a document that, up until at least very recently, the Heritage Foundation wanted people to know about. And we'll get into who it hurts specifically, but you can just kind of envision this book as a top-down listing of every single terrible, terrible dream the GOP has ever had for this country. They go after American prosperity on social, economic, every level you can think of. They want to try and dismantle our society and make it into something awful. We'll get into the details of what it looked like later on and who they're targeting, but suffice for now to say that this book is just 900 pages of every one of the worst ideas you've ever heard a conservative person have. So, now we move on to Pillar 2. The database. Now, I will say that the database itself doesn't seem to have a snappy nickname like the first pillar did, although it is colloquially referred to as LinkedIn for conservatives. And what's more, seems to have been the brainchild or baby of befuddled Project 2025 leader, quote-unquote, Paul Dans. Let's take a look at a quote from this article by Alec McGillis at ProPublica to hear more about Dan's specific involvement with this so-called LinkedIn for conservatives. Not long ago, Dans, 55, would have seemed an unlikely person for the role. The son of a liberal Johns Hopkins University professor, Dans was a New York lawyer who, before Trump's election, had never served in government. For years following that election, he had tried and failed to find a place in the administration, seemingly in spite of a celebrity connection. His wife was a fitness coach for Carly Kloss, the supermodel sister-in-law of Jared Kushner. Finally, in 2019, Dans got in the door at the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Some 4 years later, here he was, hoping to build the next administration. Dans envisioned the personnel database that he wanted to create as a quote-unquote conservative LinkedIn. To help explain it, he displayed sketches he had made. Oh my god, these sketches, y'all. I'm sorry, I'm taking a quick detour. Look at this. I mean, I get where he's going with it, but oh, these are adorable. Anyway, to help explain it, he displayed sketches he had made. They depicted the online file for a sample applicant, Betsy Ross. I'm sorry, y'all, I'm really trying. One page would show her occupation, which of the conservative organizations supporting Project 2025 had suggested her, and which agencies she was being considered for. Another would show the findings of an internal review of her application, her progress on the training sessions, one of which Dan's called Deep State 101, and any quote-unquote red flags. Yet another would show additional vetting, a web crawl report, her performance on the Project 2025 questionnaire, which would ask detailed questions about ideological and political beliefs, and more. The database would allow administration officials to search for candidates of a certain profile to fit a certain role. Now, for the record, and as an active LinkedIn user, I want to let all of you out there know, just in case you aren't on LinkedIn, that it's a cesspool. It is a cesspool composed entirely of the worst parts of American corporate culture, and is an objectively terrible thing to try and recreate from a person who uses it a lot. That being said, I can also kind of see why it would appeal to conservatives, so it's not surprising to me that they're trying to make their own. But for real, the idea here is to create a full-scale database of no less than 10,000 conservative Republican Party loyalists with an interest in working as part of Trump's 2025 government, should he end up winning the election. Fun fact, you can apply right now. So I'm going to. All right, let's do this in real time. So I'm going to open this up. Yep, presidential personnel database. Would you want to be considered for a position? Yeah, that type of thing. Okay. So you go down here, and you're going to fill out a questionnaire, and you're going to submit an application. So I'm going to do that now. Oh, it wants my mobile number. Well, that's kind of personal. All right, I'm going to enter it, but I'm going to not do that on screen. So hold on. All right, I'm entering my number. I'm going to request a one-time passcode. It was pretty fast. It sent it. Oh, it's case sensitive. Okay. All right, we got in. Took a few tries. Apparently the thing is case sensitive, so I didn't know that. Would you like to be considered for a position in a future presidential administration and participate in our trainings? I sure would, as far as you know. All right, title. The Honorable King James. You know they're going to love that one, so I should be hearing back. Let's see. Political philosophy. I am a paleo-conservative, but also a liberal. I want to live like a tolerant caveman. Because I don't know what a paleo-conservative is. Paleolithic, right? Caveman. Name a book that has most significantly shaped your political philosophy. and explain its influence on your thinking. I don't want to do this anymore. It's boring. But suffice it to say, you too can, well, not two, I didn't do it, but you can get on their conservative database of political people that they could hire for jobs to help out Trump. You could do that right now if you wanted to. Might be good to clog up their databases. I don't know. Have fun with it. It's really boring, though. I will acknowledge. The point is that Pillar 2 of Project 2025 is this database, a giant, easy-to-access, conservative pool of employees who will do Trump's bidding on into the future. And with that horrible thought, let's move on to Pillar 3 and see how they're going to get them ready for all of this government work. Because Pillar 3 is the training program. And this one does have a fancy name. Specifically, it's dubbed the Presidential Administration Academy. Let's take a look at this clip from Project 2025 Official and find out a little bit more about what they have in mind here.
Our goal is to ensure that the conservative administration that takes office in January of 2025 is ready on day one.
The next conservative president will only be able to do so with your help.
From the president of the Conservative Partnership Institute, Vice President of Hillsdale College,
the head of the Office of Justice Programs,
Assistant Secretary for Public Affairs,
Senior Advisor to the President,
Assistant Press Secretary.
It's your job to ensure that that power is executed responsibly and in line with the president's will.
This is your chance to truly make a difference.
We're glad you're joining us.
So yeah, it's kind of a 1-2 punch with Pillar 2. Not only a big list of people willing to do the terrible job you want them to do, but also a training program to make sure they have the skills to do the terrible job you want them to do. Now specifically, it seems like this program in particular is really focused on teaching these people the minutia of government work. Where the sausage is really made, so to speak, or where the actual change is made, to speak more literally. And I want to note that this in particular is one of the reasons I'm really happy to cover this topic. Because as someone with a literal master's degree in developing training programs like this and evaluating training programs like this type of move on the part of the hardline conservatives in this country should be absolutely very concerning to anyone who isn't one of them. Oh, and by the way, if you need proof, here it is. A lot of people think I'm still a caseworker. I was a caseworker for a long time. I'm not anymore. I was never a social worker. I got my terminology wrong. But last I was an HR guy. Here's my master's degree right here. And I got, you can see I'm going to cover my name, but that's James right there. That's me. I got a master's degree from Kansas State University right there. So I know about big, large-scale training programs and employee development programs, and these types of things are huge and expensive and hard to set up. And if they're putting the resources into it and they actually pull it off, this is the kind of resource that the GOP could potentially tap into for decades. This is the part that honestly worries me the most. Also, I'm just going to say it now, I think this is something that the Democrats really need to have an equivalent program for. Y'all need to be doing some outreach and getting some people to fill these positions and actually keep the government running the way it's supposed to and helping people. But anyway, all of that leads finally to the fourth pillar, namely the playbook. Now, the playbook is a separate document, distinct from Pillar 1's 922 pages of insanity. And nobody knows exactly how many pages of insanity the playbook is, because it is a top-secret transition plan covering very specifically Trump's hypothetical first 180 days in office. And it's kept secret specifically so that no one can counter-strategize against it. I will also highlight that something I saw online a lot in my research is that people get Pillars 1 and 4 confused a lot. I saw some people putting up that, oh, hey, you can download their playbook here. This is not the playbook. The thing you can download is just them saying, this is all the stuff we want to happen with the government. This is all the terrible social repression and horrible tax ideas we have. The playbook has never been released, and it won't be released based on what I've seen. Generally speaking, though, in what I saw from all the knowledgeable parties I could find about this playbook, it's going to be the blueprint for a basic dictatorship, focused particularly on consolidating as much presidential power under Donald Trump within that first 6-month time window as it possibly can, and before anybody has a chance to stop it. But it's like Donald Trump said, You only gotta be a dictator for one day as long as you change the legal definition of the word dictator before that day is over.
Under no circumstances, you are promising America tonight, you would never abuse power as retribution against anybody.
Except for day one.
Except
Look,
what?
he's going crazy. Except for day one.
Meaning?
I want to close the border and I want to drill.
That's
drill,
not
drill.
That's not retribution.
I'm gonna be, you know, he keeps, we love this guy. He says, you're not gonna be a dictator, are you? I said, no, other than day one.
Okay, but that's the 4 pillars of Project 2025. And so now I'd like to refocus our what question a little bit and see specifically what is Project 2025 targeting. And in this case, I mean, which specific groups of people are being targeted by its policy positions and ideas. And for starters, I'll say anyone who has ever had an abortion or who could potentially benefit from an abortion in the future. Seriously, if you or someone you know is capable of getting pregnant, then you know someone who will be screwed over by Project 2025. And by every account I've read at least, abortion really does seem to be one of the most actively and aggressively pursued parts of the Project 2025 agenda. For example, it seeks to ban mifepristone, currently the country's most popular and widely available birth control pill and emergency contraceptive. It also looks to codify the Hyde Amendment into law, which would ban all federal abortion funding basically in perpetuity on into the future. Furthermore, it seeks to change the Health and Human Services definition to specifically reclassify abortion as a non-healthcare procedure. And just in case all of that wasn't crazy enough on its own, it even seeks to reinstate the Comstock Act from the 1800s as a means of preventing contraceptives from being sent through the mail. So yeah, Project 2025 does not like abortion, but there's plenty of other things it doesn't like too, like immigrants, because Project 2025 pushes for massive expansions of the deportation process, immediate federal funding for the border wall, and unnecessary draconian new standards for asylum seekers. Oh, and it also looks to put Trump's citizenship question back onto the US Census, which is literally just bad data collection procedure codified into law because of racism. We're not done with the Project 2025 hate train yet. It's also not fun to gay people either. And I kind of got to talk about this part. We do say we talk about gay stuff at like the beginning of every episode, and this is no exception because it probably matters more now than ever. Because truly, the entire queer spectrum is under attack in this document. It consistently advocates for the prioritization of straight nuclear families in basically every single aspect of public life it can possibly think of, and furthermore seeks to remove a variety of workplace and public protections for LGBT folks. But while my beloved friends in the L, G, and B communities are getting it pretty bad by Project 2025, the worst vitriol is truly saved for our friends in the T part of the acronym. But yes, as you might expect, it's trans folks who take the brunt of the conservative aggression in this document, as their very real medical concerns and needs are written off as nothing more than a byproduct of pornography use. Project 2025 also seeks to codify federal limitations on transgender athletes and which sports they can participate in, and literally boils the entire concept of gender dysphoria down to just a mental problem that makes you ineffective for the military and nothing else at all. Also, as you might expect, Project 2025 likes white people and generally dislikes everyone else. Diversity, equity, and inclusion measures are being targeted all over the place with very little regard to how much they may actually be helping address real problems we have in this country with diversity, equity, and inclusion. And furthermore, Project 2025 expresses that it would look for a full ban on critical race theory being taught in schools. And bear in mind, CRT has no formal definition. This is just a way for the GOP to make illegal any telling of American history that doesn't conform to its own racist view of things. Likewise, Project 2025 is also very unfriendly to anyone who's not a billionaire or works for a living. Reading a little bit here from the Senate's Joint Economic Committee report on how Project 2025's economic policies hurt families, which is public sector research as God intended, we can find out a little bit more about how bad Project 2025 would be economically. Project 2025 would raise taxes on the working class and provide corporate welfare to the rich by shifting taxes from the wealthy to the middle class by moving to just 2 income tax rates, a 15% tax rate for people earning about $168,000 a year or below, and a 30% tax rate for people earning above that. This would force a lot of middle class families to pay thousands of dollars more in tax payments. They also seek to take away most deductions, credits, and exclusions, and don't specify that they would keep provisions like the Earned Income Tax Credit or the Child Tax Credit that overwhelmingly benefit low and middle class families. Likewise, Project 2025 seeks to lower the corporate tax rate to 18% from its current rate of 21%, which would provide more handouts to the ultra-wealthy. And furthermore, it looks to create some sort of national consumption tax. A national sales tax is usually as this comes out. You'll sometimes hear Republicans refer to that as the fair tax. It's anything but, because it would force working families, as it says here, to pay more at the grocery store, the gas pump, and any other place they buy goods and services. So yeah, it's horrible economically. But that's not all either, because you know who else it doesn't like? Kids, specifically the public school ones. Because Project 2025 seeks to place massive restrictions on the things public school kids can learn, and by that I mean they basically won't pay for anything they don't like, while simultaneously pumping tons of new money and decreasing a ton of regulations for privatized charter schools. And last, but certainly not least, Project 2025 hates woke. And I mean for real, this thing hates wokeness. Using that terminology very specifically. I mean, good Lord, Kevin Roberts literally references the Great Awakening on the first page of the document. And for real though, it is abundantly clear to anyone who reads through this thing that woke is clearly just being set up as a general overarching term for stuff conservatives don't like, and that it's kept vague on purpose so that they can reclassify anything they want as woke at any given moment in order to as effectively suppress free speech as they possibly can. Yeah, so that's the short list I came up with, at least, for the people and groups that maybe are being targeted potentially the hardest by Project 2025. But I know that there are tons of people who could debate me about that, and honestly, they're probably just as correct as I am, because this document and this plan, they hate everybody. So now you may be asking yourself, well, damn, how effective is this thing right now? Is it actually doing anything today? Is it causing any real problems? And the answer to that is, well, right now, today, no. At this moment, Project 2025 is literally nothing more than just a bunch of plans to enact should the Republicans win the presidency in November. Which I want to point out does mean it has the potential to be a massive waste of the Heritage Foundation's time and resources. And that's awesome.
You know, the breaking news is Trump has nothing to do with Project 2025. Sure, a lot of us have worked in the admin and came together, but this started long before he even announced for president. It was really a coming together of the conservative movement. But look, those ideas were open to Joe Biden and to implement if he wants to, and they actually are. It's a funny thing.
And when you say Trump has nothing to do with it, if he's reelected, do you think that parts of Project 2025 would ultimately come to fruition in a Trump second term?
Well, I hope so. You know, to be fair, 400 people worked on that book, and not everyone who wrote for the book agrees with everything in the book. You know, it's a coming together of our movement that only a plotting of points to basically direct the next conservative president. This is a way what the conservatives would like to see.
Furthermore, though, I think one could argue that Project 2025, at least up to this point, has been, in some regards, actively detrimental to the American conservative movement. I mean, it really opened up the Democrats for those insults about being weird, since this policy handbook of theirs is just loaded with conservative Christian nationalist fan fiction.
Some folks just don't understand what it takes to be a good neighbor. Take Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. Their Project 2025 will make things much, much harder for people who are just trying to live their lives. It's an agenda nobody asked for. It's an agenda that serves nobody except the richest and the most extreme amongst us. And it's an agenda that does nothing for our neighbors in need. Is it weird? Absolutely. Absolutely. But it's also wrong. And it's dangerous.
All that being said, though, I do not want to write Project 2025 off that way. A database of 10,000 party loyalists interested in learning how to make change from inside the government is a resource of such immense value that I have a hard time putting it into words. Likewise, you combine that with an effective training program, you potentially have a conservative change-making asset which could far outlive the Project 2025 from whence it came. Because, I mean, don't forget, those folks could still get plenty of government jobs. And again, as someone who has a master's degree in this kind of thing, I can tell you companies pay billions of dollars and invest years, if not decades, in setting up these kinds of resources. If this thing actually works in any capacity, well, this thing could be a very troublesome resource for the GOP to have for a very long time. But anyway, now that we've gotten the who and the what out of the way, let's take a little detour and go into the when. Very specifically, when did this whole Project 2025 thing start exactly? And very specifically, like most of the things plaguing our modern American world today, it started in 1980 with the election of Ronald Reagan. Because see, at the time, the Heritage Foundation took a rather bold new approach to the process of inserting its private organization ass into our supposedly public government. Namely, the creation of a pre-existing strategic policy plan, potentially saving an incoming president a ton of work if they agree with your policies. Basically like the think tank equivalent of getting the boss a cup of coffee on the way to work. This first time though, it worked like a charm. Reagan handed the first mandate for leadership out at his very first cabinet meeting, praised the Heritage Foundation in public speeches, and even pulled members of his cabinet from their ranks.
It's wonderful to be with you again. Some of you may remember that when the Heritage 10 Drive was inaugurated a few years ago, I had the privilege of coming over and saying a few words. I mentioned the things that were on the minds of conservatives at the moment, the place of ideas in politics, the importance of the Heritage Foundation, the remarkable work of Ed Fulner, Joe and Holly Coors, Frank Shakespeare, and so many of you in this room in bringing to Washington the political revolution that had already occurred in the American heartland.
And since then, it seems like the Heritage Foundation tries to publish one of these things every election cycle, with exceptions in 1992, 2008, and 2012. So I'm guessing they just didn't even want to waste the postage trying to send this thing to Obama. And fun fact, the official name for Project 2025 Pillar 1, the giant book, is Mandate for Leadership 9. And so yeah, that's the when. 1980. Like I said, when most bad things in modern America started. And so now let's move on to the where question of Project 2025, which I'm interpreting to mean, where exactly will Project 2025 cause problems? And I think I can answer that question in 4 simple words. Here, there, and everywhere. Now, obviously, Americans are probably going to be the ones facing the bulk of Project 2025's challenges. And yet, there are a lot of other countries that will be negatively affected by this as well, should Trump get elected, and should these policies be put into place. For one, US-Mexico relations will likely stall out entirely since Project 2025 essentially dismisses the entire Mexican government as being too inept to handle the cartels and finding ways to codify their own cruel, draconian migrant/refugee policies. Now, to be fair, some countries are going to do great under Project 2025. For example, conservative dictatorships, most notably the ones in Hungary and Russia, they're going to do great under Project 2025. And also, Israel. Yeah, and actually those might be it. That might be the countries that are going to benefit from this. And conversely, under Project 2025, Palestine will likely cease to exist entirely, with the whole nation being referenced as just the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. And in fact, throughout the entire document, Islam itself is referenced only in its connection to terrorism. And otherwise, Project 2025 basically boils every other nation on Earth down into either a country the US can make money off of or a country the US doesn't like. And as such, this thing would probably end up being catastrophic for global diplomacy on the broadest scale. So now that we've answered the where, let's get a little more existential with it and ask, why is all of this happening? And specifically, what are all of these right-wingers looking to accomplish here? Well, in my research, one thing that came up a lot is that a lot of more mainline right-wingers felt really unprepared for Trump's 2016 victory, which they blame for all the chaos of his first term. And likewise, many of them also believe that Trump could be a useful tool in accomplishing their own goals, regardless of how they feel about him personally. Yes, these folks would rather spend over $20 million doing all of the legwork for this candidate that they now seem to be at odds with, rather than even entertaining the idea that putting him into office might be the worst idea ever imaginable. But at the same time, Project 2025 in a lot of regards also just boils down to policy and procedure. The conservatives see a very viable avenue to make government change, one I agree that is very viable, and they're attempting to seize it. See, there are pathways in this country through which change can be made, but they're usually too slow for, well, anyone's liking, and honestly, sometimes too slow to even be recognized as change at all. And one can theoretically speed up the slow slog of careful, cautious government by putting dedicated loyalists into key jobs all up and down the lawmaking process. And particularly one can speed things up even more if all of said lackeys are put under a single tyrant who is simply allowed to declare unilateral action whenever they see fit.
Read Hamilton's number 70, because there, along with some other essays, he talks about the importance of a vigorous executive. You know, former congressman, the importance of Congress doing its job, but we also know the importance of the executive being able to do his job. And can you imagine, Dave Bratt, any president, put politics off to the side, any president having to second guess, triple guess every decision they're making in their official capacity? You couldn't have the republic that you just described.
Of course, you just need to make sure that said tyrant is a perfect paragon of justice, honor, and goodwill towards their fellow humanity. Oh, also in that they're super smart and wise and can basically make an appropriate decision at any time, no matter what. And that they don't have any troublesome biases, which could lead to preferential or detrimental treatment, depending on which side of that bias you're on. And you also probably should always make sure that they like you personally. And you should probably always make sure that they agree with you, too. But yeah, if you do all of that stuff, it's a really great system.
Easy as pie.
And yes, obviously Donald Trump is a terrible choice for this. I don't have to tell anyone watching this video that, I'm sure. But more broadly, though, and this is just me riffing a little bit, but I think that the conservatives are doing this because social progress scares the fuck out of them. For all of their irritating nationalistic bluster, I swear, American far right-wing conservatives would rather go back to living under King George than use their grandkids' preferred pronouns or tax a billionaire. The idea of their white, conservative Christian homeland is so tantalizing that they're willing to give up both democracy and decency to get it. And furthermore, years of vilifying laborers, labor unions, libraries, public schools and colleges, and any other sort of progressive, positive social collectivism have left these folks with no hope for a better life other than the possibility of living under a right-wing totalitarian dictator whose policies just so happen to screw them over slightly less than they screw over everyone else. So yeah, that's the why I think they're doing this. It's pretty sad. So now let's move on to my honorary fifth W, how, which is how, on a fundamental level, do they expect to accomplish a lot of this? And well, in order to understand that, we need to take a look at the unitary executive theory. Now, the unitary executive theory is a very fringe, renegade conservative political ideology, which basically aims to give the president full, nearly unchecked control of the executive branch, but further still, also sets said executive branch in a position of power above the other branches of government. It's how you turn a president into a dictator without having to change the label.
If anyone can imagine a way of restoring a balance between these branches from the present, supremacy of the legislative and judicial branches, I simply cannot imagine it as a real thing in any way on this earth. What I can imagine is restoring this balance by reserving absolute power to the chief executive. So, in order to remedy this sort of great imbalance or this usurpation of the legislative and judicial branches over the executive branch, which has become the Democratic branch with a small d, and thus has been rendered utterly toothless in the sense that the president himself has power over the government. The only remedy for this wrong is to put the president entirely in charge of the government. And that essentially means that the executive branch, far from being checked and balanced in a way that does not work and has left the executive branch not checked and balanced, but simply hogtied and held hostage, is to render the executive branch completely unilateral.
Notably, Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh is a particularly prominent proponent of the unitary executive theory.
So having seen how difficult the job is, I think it's important that we think about how we can structure the system so that the president's able to focus on his never-ending task with as few distractions as possible. And with that in mind, it seems to me that it's one first proposal I'd have is that Congress take action to alter the result in the Clinton versus Jones case. The Clinton versus Jones case, as you'll recall, allowed a civil suit to proceed against the president while he's in office. But the court indicated that Congress could always provide for a temporary deferral of civil suits against the president. And I think there's no good reason that Congress should not do so. To be sure, this may not seem like an urgent issue, but it's in separation of powers, it's important to see around the corner, to see what the issues that could arise in the future are. And in my judgment, it would make a good deal of sense for Congress to make sure that a situation that occurred in 1998 with the Clinton versus Jones case and then the resulting criminal investigation doesn't occur again while a president is in office.
And in case it's not coming across by now, under the unitary executive theory, the president kind of becomes functionally identical to a dictator or a king. For a lot of the conservatives we've talked about here, that's not only a non-issue, it's the goal of all of this. Now, all of this terrible dictator stuff aside, it does have one particular benefit, which is that, as we've said, it can make the processes of government very efficient, and that makes some people very happy. By which I mean people who just want to shake things up or create change for the sake of change. Here on screen you can see an example of one of these people who just likes to get a little crazy every now and then and shake up the system, you know what I mean? So yeah, not a good system of government or good ideology for anyone who actually wants the country or our world to succeed, but great for people who find modern government a little too slow for their liking. Now, there is also another more immediate part of getting Project 2025 enacted, namely Trump's Schedule F proposal. The Schedule F proposal was a nickname for Trump's plan to reclassify thousands upon thousands of purposely neutral government employees as appointed political positions, allowing the president direct control in filling them and further allowing them to openly consider party affiliation and personal loyalties as part of the selection process for government employees. And this is really bad. This system has to be neutral. It's called common sense.
You know, we're living in a society.
Now, Trump attempted to get Schedule F through at the end of his last term, but following his 2020 loss, the policy was swiftly repealed by the Biden administration. However, should it be reinstated early into a second Donald Trump term, it would open the door for him to start putting all of the Heritage Foundation's 10,000-strong database of conservative lackeys straight to work reshaping the government in his own terrifying image. So basically take the awful beliefs and unquenchable ego of Donald Trump and then make him fully immune from challenge or consequence of any kind. It's like if a bunch of teenagers went into the woods and strapped a bulletproof vest on a grizzly bear.
Then what do you got? Invincible bears. Is that what you want?
Whew, well, all of that sure is the frickin' worst, ain't it? And yet, ironically, as bad as all that Project 2025 stuff is, it could also end up being the best thing that ever happened to this country, albeit in the most ass-backwards way possible. Because here's the thing. Nobody likes Project 2025. This past year, and very particularly the past 2 months or so, as knowledge of Project 2025 has more and more broadly entered the public consciousness, so too has hatred for it grown right alongside. Seriously, right now, everyone hates this thing. Oddly, it's been kind of unifying for our country, albeit in a really uncomfortable way. Project 2025 is so unpopular for conservatives that being neutral or avoidant of it isn't even an option anymore. One must instead be actively antagonistic towards Project 2025. And all of this goes particularly for the man at the top of the Republican presidential ticket, Donald Trump himself.
What you're going to hear tonight is a detailed and dangerous plan called Project 2025 that the former president intends on implementing if he were elected again.
Number one, I have nothing to do, as you know, and as she knows better than anyone, I have nothing to do with Project 2025. That's out there. I haven't read it. I don't want to read it purposely. I'm not going to read it. This was a group of people that got together. They came up with some ideas, I guess some good, some bad. But it makes no difference. I have nothing to do. Everybody knows I'm an open book. Everybody knows what I'm going to do. Cut taxes very substantially and create a great economy like I did before.
Oh, see, and it's all particularly troublesome when your second in command writes a vicious preamble for Project 2025 architect Kevin Roberts' upcoming book. The old conservative movement argued if you just got government out of the way, natural forces would resolve problems. We are no longer in this situation and must take a different approach. As Kevin Roberts writes, it's fine to take a laissez-faire approach when you are in the safety of the sunshine. But when the twilight descends and you hear the wolves, you've got to circle the wagons and load the muskets. We are all now realizing that it is time to circle the wagons and load the muskets. In the fights that lay ahead, these ideas are an essential weapon. Well, that's unnerving and concerning, yeah, muskets. But anyway, it's gotten so bad for Project 2025 at this point that Trump's already even written his own pseudo-Project 2025 now, called Agenda 47. And he is much more interested in having you read that than he is that 900 pages we've been talking about. Which, to be fair, is much easier since Agenda 47 is all of 16 pages. For reference, that's slightly less than 2% of the 922 pages of Project 2025 Pillar 1, which is also about as much of Project 2025 as we could ever hope Trump to read or comprehend. And not to mention that all of this has just spelled disaster for the Heritage Foundation. For example, that book JD wrote the foreword for Kevin, well, that book has now been delayed until after the election, when I'm sure it will sell not nearly as much. Likewise, Paul Dans got released from his role on Project 2025, and even more than that, got himself and the entire project absolutely eviscerated on the way out the door.
3/4 of likely voters say they've not only heard about it, but for most of those who know about it, they oppose it. 63% of that number opposed to Project 2025. Those numbers might explain Trump's multiple attempts to distance himself from Project 2025 overall.
We have nothing to do with Project 25. I don't even know what the hell it is. I don't know anything about it.
And so some people say, okay, well, 140 of his staffers worked on it. How can you say that he has nothing to do with it?
Well, he personally didn't have anything to do with it. Certainly a lot of folks, worked on it, came out of the Trump administration, but that's natural for any Republican administration.
Does it bother you when Trump calls it abysmal and ridiculous? I mean, something that you worked on for 2 years?
Well, I mean, I don't know what he's referring to in particular with that.
And as one might expect, this has also been the biggest strategic boon to show up on the DNC's doorstep since Mitt Romney revealed the secret way that all those Mormon polygamists keep track of their wives.
Whole binders full of women.
And thankfully, unlike usual, it seems like the Dems are actually trying to seize upon this universally despised albatross currently draped over Donald Trump's neck. References to this thing are everywhere in both political settings and more broadly in pop culture now, which is how you know it's gotten real out of hand for the GOP.
This is Project 2025, the Republican blueprint for a second Trump term. It is boo. It is a real document that you can read for yourself at KamalaHarris.com/ Project 2025. Now, Nirvana, I understand that you are on insulin to manage your diabetes, yes?
Yes, and thanks to President Biden and Vice President Harris, I only pay $35 a month for my insulin.
That is great. That is great. But on page 465, Project 2025 calls for millions of people like yourself to pay more for prescription drugs like insulin.
Why?
Why? Well, I guess maybe to help Big Pharma make more money that they can donate to Republican politicians, I assume.
And particularly the weird thing that Tim Walz started and that has now kind of become a big part of the Democratic strategy, it's just excellent work. Great way to seize on this.
And by the way, don't you find some of their stuff to just be plain weird?
So yeah, everything's all fine and saved now, right? No, because here's the thing. The Democrats can still absolutely screw this up. For one thing, they really need to not get cocky. There is life after this election, and they need to be aware of that just as much as the life before it. The Harris campaign and the Democratic Party at large need to show the country that they won't be satisfied with a mere November victory, but that their eyes are set on tackling the important issues we face after the election.
Hold on. Hold on. Hold on. This campaign, our campaign, is not just a fight against Donald Trump. Our campaign, this campaign, is a fight for the future. It's a fight for the future. In Pennsylvania, we fight for a future with affordable housing, affordable health care, affordable child care, paid leave. We fight for a future where we build a broad-based economy, where every American has the opportunity to own a home, to start a business, and to build wealth. We fight for a future where we bring down prices that are still too high and lower the cost of living for America's families.
Now, for the record, the DNC does have a platform that you can download. It's publicly available and you can read it right now. I won't pretend to have finished it yet, but I can tell that it's detailed and is at least trying to find avenues for innovative ways that it can make progress. And it's also much better than the Republican platform, which is basically, in my opinion, like a weird, strange midpoint between Project 2025 and Agenda 47, lacking in identity, but making up for it with pretty pictures and graphics. Likewise, just as the Republicans have shown us they're doing, so too do the Democrats need to mobilize in kind. While I hate the politics, ideology, and goals of Project 2025, I can't deny that it is an impressive and useful effort for anyone who doesn't feel that way. Particularly, the DNC needs a better process by which to engage active, interested folks who might want to work in the government, and then to be able to transition them into those roles and train them how to do them. And you can't just keep recruiting candidates. It has to be civil servants, too. Oh, and Democrats, while I'm happy to see you actually pouncing on a political advantage for once, please rethink your strategy in some regards. Which is to say, stop telling people to just Google Project 2025, because then they're going to need people like me to explain it, and in reality, it's your job to explain it.
I'm still here because you can't do your job.
Likewise, though, we cannot at all discount the possibility that Donald Trump could win this election. And if you want to know what he's going to focus on, well, just take a look at Agenda 47, because that comes straight from the horse's mouth.
So just a yes or no, you still do not have a plan?
I have concepts of a plan. I'm not president right now.
But that being said, if he wins, Project 2025 is still far from dead at that point. I mean, Trump reportedly utilized 60% or so of the Mandate for Leadership 7 from 2016, actually pretty similar to the amount Reagan reportedly used. And I mean, Trump's already got a lot of the same ideologies that Project 2025 espouses, so it's not like we can really expect a change of heart or anything. And furthermore, we can be absolutely sure that he'll be interested in hiring from that pool of 10,000 pre-trained government lackeys ready to do every single little part of his awful bidding. And so yeah, here at the end of all of this, let's answer the last and maybe most pressing question of all. What can all of us do about it? If anyone other than Donald Trump wins, Project 2025 becomes basically nothing more than a gigantic waste of time and money. But if he wins, it has the potential to become a nightmare reality from which our nation may never wake up, because we can work with basically anybody who's not him. One of the things I always worry about with these kind of big nationwide policy initiatives is that they pull our eyes away from the very real and very important local elections that are also part of these cycles. That's how crafty billionaires like Peter Thiel snuck so many terrible local legislators in on us. So in that spirit, you want to know who I'm actually most excited to vote for this political season? Crystal Quaid to be Missouri's next governor, considering how our last governor, Republican Mike Parson, gave the order for the state-sanctioned murder of Marcellus Williams. But here at the very end, most of all, don't forget that this election is essentially nothing more than a big job interview. We aren't picking a king or a dictator or whatever weird hybrid Brett Kavanaugh and Curtis Yarvin want to wish into existence. We're picking a civil servant, paying them with our tax dollars to support our best interests. Be ready to advocate for your community and yourself, no matter who wins the election, while also acknowledging that Donald Trump and the American right wing are too dangerous to be let anywhere near office right now, and if they are allowed into office at this level, will likely seize all mechanisms of government available and begin active persecution of American citizens as soon as they possibly can. Go cast your vote by whatever means necessary. Check your registration status too. There is still time. You can look it up online. Just Google whatever state you're in, check voter registration, and you'll find the instructions. It's out there. And I mean, yeah, door knock, donate, debate, do all those things as you're comfortable. But most importantly, vote. And otherwise, at least for just tonight, relax and take it easy. And thanks for hanging out with me. After all, you did just spend quite a while getting real familiar with Project 2025. You understand it now, and you don't need to be confused. Good night, and I hope to see you next time.